Madam President, someone's already asked unanimous consent that U.S. Army Major Justin Gorkowski, who's a fellow in my Senate office, be granted floor privileges for this debate. I just want to express how pleased we've been and how lucky we've been to have the Major with us helping with these issues. He's a graduate of West Point. He currently serves as an Information Operations Officer. He served as an advisor to the Iraq Army during the surge in 2006 and 7 and returned from Afghanistan in January of last year, where he'd been responsible for psychological operations, electronic warfare, and military deception for Kandahar province. He's been a great addition to our office during this debate, and in my view, this debate is the most important debate we have. The number one priority for the federal government is to defend the country. Now, we can spend all the time we want to talking about all the other priorities and all the things we should be doing and whether there's some sudden mystical balance between all of those priorities and defending the country. But in most of our states, and certainly in the state of Missouri, the one thing that you can get the least argument on as to what the federal government should do that we can't do for ourselves is defend the country. That's why for 54 years straight, the Senate has passed this defense authorizing bill every year. There are very few things that get authorized every year, very few things that get debated every year, very few things that get looked at every year, but our national defense is one of those, and it's one of those for a reason. You hear all kinds of reasons not to move forward with this bill, and then you hear, but I'm for the bill. Well, that's because people understand that this is one of the things that the federal government is supposed to do, and in my view, the top thing we can't in any way do for ourselves. Local government can't do this, state governments can't do this, individually we can't do this. That's why this debate is always so important, why the committee voted this out. The Armed Services Committee voted this out 22-4 after all kinds of suggestions that, well, maybe the minority would not vote for this for reasons we just heard. But at the end of the day, the vote's 22-4 out of the committee. I thought Chairman McCain and Ranking Member Reed have done a good job of bringing this bill to the floor, bringing this bill with bipartisan support, and looking for ways to reform defense so that we really focus our defense where the defenders are rather than where the defenders aren't. This bill is focused on eliminating wasteful spending. It focuses on finding ways to reduce bureaucracy and streamlining the critical military functions we have. It puts a focus on the fighting forces, not the bureaucratic forces in the defense structure. The bill identifies $10 billion in excessive and unnecessary spending and reallocates those funds to our true military capabilities. It also modernizes the military retirement system so that many more who serve have a retirement benefit from serving. The current retirement system benefits less than 20% of those who serve in the armed forces because the people that are benefited are people who serve 20 years and retire at that point. This bill would create a system where service members and taxpayers join together to create a retirement benefit that the estimate is that 75% of people who serve in uniform, who serve in the military, would leave with a retirement benefit rather than only 17, 18, 20% of people leaving the military. It's a reform that really honors all those who serve in a good way and doesn't penalize any who serve. It still allows people who've been serving under the old system to stay under the old system. And obviously, the longer you stay in that system, the better you're going to do. But the options now are basically no retirement benefit or a retirement benefit that comes with substantial service and only with that kind of service. This bill creates retention bonuses to keep people in the military longer than 20 years. We have men and women retiring at the height of their capacity with technical skills that not easily replaced. This bill recognizes that and recognizes looking for ways to encourage them to continue to serve. Our state, the state of Missouri, has a real commitment to the military. More than 17,000 active duty service members serve from Missouri. We have important bases in our state. We have 8,000 civilian Department of Defense employees and more than 20,000 members of the Reserve and the National Guard. This bill authorizes funding to build a consolidated stealth operations and nuclear alert facility at Whiteman Air Force Base. It preserves and prevents the retirement of the A-10 plane that has wide support in the Congress, but more importantly, the A-10 has wide support from the ground forces that it supports from the air. When you talk to people who serve on the ground, General Odinero and others will say that in their view, there's no plane that does what this plane does. And of course, those who fly it, those who support it, are important to that. The Whiteman Air Force Base, again, has the 442nd Fighter Wing. It's an A-10 fighter wing, just got back from being deployed. This bill also authorizes upgrades in our cargo aircraft, the C-130 aircraft that will help the main force as well as the National Guard and reserves. In fact, Rosecrans Air Base, National Guard, Rosecrans Base at St. Joseph is a great training facility for our forces, but also a training facility that at least 19 of our allies came to last year to train, to figure out how to get supplies, how to get troops, how to move things with those cargo planes in ways that they otherwise would not be able to do. This bill also takes an important step in moving forward with the new bomber. There's money here that would continue to fund the new plan for the idea out there for a long-range bomber. We have to have that. We have to have precision bombing capability that is better than anybody else's. And the planes we're using now have been the best planes in the world for a long time, but they won't be the best planes in the world forever. And it's time to begin to move forward as we have been toward that new plane. Those are all important. There are key initiatives here promoting accountability, promoting the standards that we need to have for performance in the military and how we reward those standards. This bill maintains critical quality of life programs for men and women that serve and their families. This bill addresses needs of our wounded, of our ill, of our injured service members, and it continues to provide critical assistance to our allies, particularly our ally Israel, where we have significant common research and common effort. As we've all seen in recent years, the David Sling and the Iron Dome weapon systems are critical not only for Israel's security, but they've been critical proving grounds for the kind of response that was once looked at as some kind of unachievable Star Wars capacity, that both David Sling and the Iron Dome have proved that capacity is in fact truly achievable, and we continue to move forward with that kind of defense system in this bill. This also goes a long way toward combating the threats of cyberspace and cybersecurity by evaluating what those vulnerabilities are and dealing with those vulnerabilities. I want to mention a few amendments that I intend to offer before we move on with this bill. I've filed that I think strengthen the bill. First, I believe the military's mental health screening process can be improved. We've learned a lot about mental health and behavioral health over the past 15 years. I believe we can continue to adapt, and frankly, last year's defense authorization bill had important steps in this direction that I was able to get in the bill when I was a member of the committee last year, not just the appropriating committee, the defense appropriating committee that I serve on now, but the defense authorizing committee that I served on then. The amendments I will offer will improve the pre-deployment health assessment and post-deployment health reassessment by requiring that all service members be screened, that they don't have to meet some criteria that every member of the service may not meet. It's important while people are serving to establish the things that have happened to them, so later if they need to come back and ask years later, perhaps, for assistance in what truly was a post event that was caused by their service but didn't show up for a number of years, having the incidents and things that might have affected their mental health is important. You know, the National Institute of Health says 1 in 4 adult Americans has a diagnosable and almost always treatable behavioral health issue. I've asked the Secretary, the Surgeon Generals of the Armed Forces if that number applies to the Armed Forces, and without hesitation, they say yes. They say we recruit from the general population. There's no reason that number wouldn't apply to people serving us in uniform, and the key there is diagnosable and treatable. Diagnosable and treatable in a way that people aren't held back by their behavioral health issues any more than they're held back by their physical health issues. They just need to be dealt with. And so hopefully we're going to look at mild traumatic stress injury potential, post-traumatic stress injury potential, looking at the things that affect somebody as they move forward from their time in the service. What happens in the service and what can happen years after really matters. Those amendments on mental health meet I think the evolving needs of service members, and hopefully the evolving needs of how we understand behavioral health as it relates to all other health. Have another amendment, Madam President, that would not allow the Army to go below the currently authorized end-strength level of 475 soldiers, 475,000 soldiers. Threats around the world, increases to our national security. We heard General Odinero, Chief of Staff of the Army, testify earlier this year before the Defense Appropriating Committee about the risk associated with going below 490,000 soldiers. This amendment would say you can't go below the 475,000 soldiers until the Secretary of Defense tells the Congress how he plans to reduce excess headquarters elements and excess administrative overhead. Just this morning, I read an article from military.com discussing Navy Secretary Ray Mabus's recent comments about excessive bloat, his term, at the DoD headquarters functions. The article states, quote, Secretary Mabus said Pentagon and congressional budget cutters should look at eliminating extra bureaucracy before slashing funds for sailors and ships. Mabus said 20% of the Pentagon budget spent on what he called, quote, again, pure overhead, unquote. Items not directly linked to readiness or items not direct linked to ongoing operations. Mabus referred to this overhead as the fourth estate, specifying entities such as the Office of the Secretary of Defense, the defense agencies and organizations funded by the Undersecretaries of Defense. Here's another direct quote from Secretary Mabus. There are other places to look rather than taking tools from the warfighter. To the extent we can, protect the stuff that actually gets to the warfighter. End his quote. I think my amendment would ensure that the Secretary of Defense has to take that quote to heart.
The Senate has an order for a vote at this hour.
Can I have ask for additional 1 minute?
Is there objection? Without objection.
Without objection, and I want to make one other comment. One other amendment I have that I'll talk more about later in this debate is the concern I have for Iran's growing influence in Iraq and the failure that we have had in maintaining the commitment we made to those Camp Liberty residents that in 2000 we promised to protect. More than 100 residents have been killed at Camp Liberty, and I recognize the State Department's ongoing efforts, but they're not good enough, and I believe the Secretary of Defense needs to certify to the defense committees that the central government of Iraq is taking appropriate and sufficient steps to ensure the safety and security of Iranian dissidents housed at Camp Liberty in Iraq.